Love you, Linda. Love you.
The courthouse the other day in the hallway, you're singing "Oh Happy Day."
One word prayer. Justice, where are you?
And welcome to a special edition of Justice Serve TV. Michael Bryant here. It is good to have you along. And nothing personal, but it's even better to have along the guest that I have today to talk about Karen Reed, talk about policing, talk about the evaluation of law enforcement, good, bad, otherwise. And in the context of the Karen Reed case, I'm not sure there's a better example of maybe what you should do, shouldn't do, could do, might do, didn't do. So joining me, I'm very happy to say this day is Joe Giacalone, better known as the Sarge. Hey, Joe, how you doing, man?
Good, Mike. How are you?
Good. Before we launch into this, give me the Sarge story. I'm guessing that's from the military or from policing. How did that come about? How did you become the Sarge?
Yeah, I spent over 20 years in New York City Police Department. Most of the time I spent as a sergeant, then I got promoted to what they call Sergeant SDS, which is Supervisor Detective Squad. And that carried over. I mean, I've written a couple of books. I've been teaching for over 20 years at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in Manhattan. And I started the YouTube channel about, I guess we'll be going on almost 2 years ago, and just coming up with names. I just came up with True Crime with the Sergeant. That was it, and it kind of stuck.
Yeah, nice. Sometimes that's just the best way to do it. And I want to say thanks because I was watching one of your shows and you had a guest on who I apologize, I can't remember the guest's name, but you were promoting and directing folks to come check us out here at Justice Serve TV.
Yep.
So I appreciate that. And I think your guest said there's so many, true crime related channels. I think that last check it was 20,000, something like that. So good for you for standing above the fray, because they're not all great. I'll just leave it at that.
No, but I mean, most of the ones I've interacted with, and most of the people like yourself and Linda, and I named a bunch of them because someone had asked me, just not to get off topic, but they had asked me like, "Well, who's your big competition?" And I'm like, "I don't have any competition because I'm just here to have fun." And that's when I started rattling off some names. I've been on so many shows, but it's actually the kindness of strangers when you're dealing with this on the YouTube and the collaborations. That's what I'm really excited about in that respect, and I have fun, and I think sometimes that shows through in the streams that we do.
No doubt. And here's something I found out. I come from a more traditional background, national syndication, network, court TV, etc. Let's just say it's not as collaborative. Let me put it that way. And so as I got into this with Linda and learned just exactly what you're saying, that everybody, the creators are very collaborative, very happy to help, to share what they've learned along the way, things they did wrong, things they did right, things they hope to do, and it's a whole different environment. Do I have any knives in my back? I don't have any knives in my back. It's just the real, what I call the old school real, back in the day type TV, whole different animal. And they should be concerned because I think broadcast TV is virtually dead and cable has got one foot in the grave. I mean, the future is here where people can just pick and choose what they want when they want it, and tens of thousands of options are the future. So
Yeah, and I'll tell you a quick thing. Somebody on my stream one time, they had put it on. They says, "We don't even watch TV anymore. We come to watch the streams with you guys and all because this is our education. We're learning from people who've done this already, and it's entertaining and educating." And I thought that was pretty cool.
yeah, no doubt about it, and it's more organic. So you got people who have an experience bringing it and sharing it in a very informal way. It's cool. It's great. I'm glad we got involved. So anyway, talking about getting involved, once you go down the Karen Reed rabbit hole, it is a tough climb out. And so now here we are, 27 days, I think, 27 court days. And the defense, we hear yesterday, as Karen Reed was leaving, I was at the courthouse yesterday, her guesstimate was that the defense could wrap up as early as Tuesday. So even throw an extra day in there, then you got the rebuttal case. This could be to the jury mid-June.
No, I think so. If you think so, I think in the first trial, I think the defense only called, I think, 6 or 7 people, if I remember correctly. So yeah, I don't think that's a big stretch, right? I mean, we can be looking at this by the end of next week. So hey, listen, at this point, you know what? let's just move on and see what we can do with this. I don't even think and from the beginning that this case should have been brought as a murder case anyway. But that's just my opinion, of course.
Well, I think that's shared by. I've not heard one person, and the reason is they can't back it up with evidence. I've not heard one person say, "Oh yeah, this is a second-degree murder case. She intentionally ran into, bumped into Officer John O'Keefe." And I think that overcharge, it may help the prosecution because now there's this compromise thing in the middle with the second charge of manslaughter with the DUI related element. And juries, they like to compromise if they come to loggerheads in some way. They couldn't do it the first trial, right? That's how they ended up hung. But it does give them options that it sometimes helps a defendant, sometimes hurts a defendant. We wanted to talk about something that kind of a weird phenomenon. We had, let's see, Sergeant Barros was on the stand last week, and again, these are defense witnesses we're talking about. There's one common theme. We also had Lucky law firm Brian. So glad he has a nickname. There are way too many Brians in this case. So Lucky law for the snowplow driver, or as Hank Brennan once called him, a tow truck driver. And Lucky had to correct him, Mr. Brennan, I don't drive a tow truck. So these guys, the word that seems to come out when describing them is honest. They seem like honest guys, an honest cop, an honest citizen who's just working to get through it. And we just decided it seemed odd that somebody speaking credibly and honestly is weird. It's rare. It's noteworthy, right? I mean, we've had so many witnesses in this case. What's your take on the fact that that in itself kind of resonates? You're right. These guys seem kind of honest, and we think that's noteworthy.
Yeah, it's actually a shame that we have to concentrate on one or two people and say, "Hey, this actually sounds legitimate," right? So you walked away from those testimonies saying, "You know what? I can believe that," right? They had some credibility, they had some integrity. Yeah, we know the cross examination was very good by Hank Brennan and this and that, but I still think the sting of what Sergeant Barrow said is going to sit and resonate with the jury. I mean, he seemed to be forthright and he seemed to be, straight on, straight shooter. The only thing I didn't like is that, and I was yelling at the TV when he was doing it because because I've been in his shoes where the defense attorney is hitting you with those rapid fire questions and you're answering them fast, 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 and then he hit him with that whole thing about his memory and whatever, and he kind of has like that deer in the headlight look, and that just that's the kind of tactics that get used, but you have to be mindful of that. But that happens through training too, and or experience. Like I
And,
said, you get
and
burned once doing that.
I was curious about that whole it would seem like a tangent on the memory thing, and then there was I did a little research, and apparently this witness had a serious injury not too long ago, and I'm sure they limited where Brennan could go on that topic. So it seemed to kind of stand out as some sort of like, where did he get that? Where is that coming from? Obviously, any cross examination to undermine that witness, you go after things like their memory and their ability to perceive and recollect. I get all that, but this sounded more targeted. And then when I did that research, it made it seem pretty clear that it was a soft spot with Sergeant Barrows because it stemmed from a physical injury.
And just even that besides, I mean, I'm not a lawyer. Let's just get that out there, right?
Good
But
for you.
I
Good for
yeah,
you.
I thought that when the prosecutor went after this cop for his memory and didn't document things, this and that. And I'm sitting there going, what? Because like this entire prosecution's case wasn't documented. People are questioning some of the cops, what they're saying on the stand and what was done. And I'm like, dude, I don't know if that's the right road to go down. You open Pandora's box, and I'm sure the defense picked that up, and I think we'll hear about that somewhere along the line.
Yeah, that's one of the other things I want to talk about was, this planned attack by the defense on the process itself, the investigation, law enforcement activities, and they had an expert queued up to talk about that, Michael Easter, and he was denied. The court said, "No, we don't need this guy. This is within, as they say, the ken of the jury. This is just common sense." Thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I look at it this way. Look, the judge makes the decision, of course, what's going to happen in certain circumstances. But I'll give her the benefit of the doubt that she didn't realize how bad this investigation was from beginning middle, and end. I mean, there are so many holes in this investigation, starting with the uniformed police officers. I mean, we could talk about this all day, but in hindsight, I'm sure she was probably regretting not having somebody in there to say, no, this is the way it should be done. There are certain cardinal rules that you do in policing that just that this universal everywhere. This has been written about by NIJ and other, government agencies. They give out books about death investigations. I'm talking about the federal government here, right? So, I mean, yes, the federal government doesn't make laws and rules and policies and procedures, so far for law enforcement. Each state and county does their own thing, but there are certain cardinal rules that are stick through all 50 states, and they should be adhered to.
There's a chance this is going to raise its ugly head again, because what we've seen, right? I think that the defense has to, and I think they made a motion to reconsider Mr. Easter's testimony. I fully expect it will be denied as well. But as you look down the road, and there might be an appeal, if there is a conviction, the stack of appealable issues continues to grow. And I wonder if you give Judge C a lot more credit than I do, having seen her move through trial one and so far in trial two. I think she knows exactly how poorly this investigation unfolded. From solo cups and
Well,
leaf
now she
blowers
does.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Now
and
she does.
I don't know if
I mean,
I don't know if I give her a conscience to say, okay, I misread that. This guy's got to testify. Remember how this unfolded in court, which is one of the most dramatic moments when Alan Jackson is arguing, that we need this guy and here's why. And Brennan stands up and makes it sound like, well, what then we have to bring in people. If we have to bring in people to say, no, this was done perfectly well, we're going to bring in a series of Massachusetts State policemen or Canton policemen to say this was done perfectly. We can't judge. We can't do that. She picks up on that theme and asks Alan Jackson, Mr. Jackson, is that something you'd want? And one of the famous moments of the trial so far was, do it. Because anybody who was watching that and understanding what that back and forth might be like was saying, yeah, do that, because there will be nothing more entertaining. And I'm sorry, it is entertaining, but hearing cops try to defend the investigation and the process that these agencies undertook to allegedly find out what happened.
yeah, that would have been go ahead, make my day moment. I mean, really, and I don't know if you remember, but I had made a public statement about after the first trial that the governor. First of all, I had made predictions. I said that Proctor was going to get fired, and I said, I got a lot of pushback on that when it was actually happening. But I said, and I went back to the fact that the governor was talking about this case in public, right? So if and then the state police chief at the time, or superintendent, whatever they call him up in Massachusetts, he was only a temporary person. So I'm like, if this guy wants to stay in this position, he's going to do whatever the governor tells him because he works at the behest of the governor. And this is how I explained it to people. And now I got all the pushback. They're not going to do anything. And then lo and behold, they fired him. And this guy gets, raised up in there. But I had also said that there needs to be an immediate overhaul of the training that we saw or heard about, and about the basics, getting everybody back to the basics, because this was an unacceptable level of investigation as far as I'm concerned, and they didn't do anything.
I flash back on the audit, right? The audit that they spent, I think it was a couple $100,000 on, and then they unveiled it at what I called the clown hall meeting. And it just sounded, to see it all put down in writing, and then a lot of it dismissed as not a big deal, don't worry about it, was shocking. The folks who live up there couldn't believe it, and so they're justifying. Sure, they found some things that could be fixed and could be done better, and I think they now have body cams on all the officers as a result of this trial. So they're making some changes. Yeah, we get it, but it just sounded more like an excuse than an explanation and a fix. Did you? What's your take on that whole audit process?
Listen, I've been a proponent of body cams from the very beginning when they were first brought out. And the reason why is because I was going to say, yeah, Lord, yeah, let's do it, because we're going to see how bad the public is in certain circumstances. And we watch those videos, Mike, every day on the internet about people who are refusing to roll down windows, and people who are, cursing at the cops and I mean, it's been a real improvement for policing in regards to showing in court, traffic court, whatever, saying, look, this is what the person did. This is what they said. Now we're hearing pushback and saying, well, maybe we shouldn't be, worried about all these cams and stuff all of a sudden. No, listen, the ACLU, all those people, they wanted it because they thought the cops were running amok. And it shows that most of the time the police are doing what they're supposed to do, and it's the public that's acting badly. So
Yeah.
shame on any police agency that doesn't want to do this, because it has done nothing but improve policing, and it's also improved that police community relations, because the smart ones out in the street, even if they're doing bad things, realize that there's cameras potentially everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's a deterrent.
And if you're concerned about having a camera to record your official duties, maybe you should be doing something else.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, we've seen, a couple of instances where, the body cams has shown the cops have not done the right thing. That's fine. Then you have to deal with that. But it's overwhelmingly been in the police court for a good thing to have. It's been great.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, because you reminded me of kind of the chain of command here. And we have apparently from the DA Morrissey on down, they're in lockstep on this case. They have an agenda. They, obviously, if they bring a case, they want a conviction. That's not unusual, not unheard of, and that's expected. But what do you think about witnesses like I call her Never Say Dever, and so I'll make sure I pronounce her name correctly. The young officer, 25 years old, came in and testified in one of the most bizarre ways I've ever seen. Had a one-on-one sit down with the commissioner prior to her testimony. Can you give me your take on any of that?
Yeah, I kind of addressed this. I have a buddy, Mike, that we do the roll call show sometimes at 8 a.m. And we were talking about this. And Mike had over 30 years and I had over 20 years. And I asked him, I said, Mike, how many times did you meet the police commissioner? How many times did you get called up to see the police commissioner in 30 years? And basically promotion. That was about it. I met him twice, once at Medal Day and then once when I got promoted. But other than that, you know, you don't want to see the police commissioner.
Going to the
You know,
principal's office?
yeah, you don't want to do that, right? I mean, I try to avoid working in one police plaza my whole career, and then at the end I got stuck at it, and that's when I left. But yeah, listen, that whole bit really left a bad taste in my mouth. I mean, and I actually feel bad for other female officers out there, because if you read the vitriol online about it has just been bad. And credibility wise, all those different things. I think, if she would have said that, based on the information that I had, I worked 18 hours in a row, I was up all night, whatever it is, and I made a mistake. That would have been believable to me, right?
Yeah.
Because, and listen, I mean, I thought that, missed opportunity here was to tie her down to actually when she left. And I think Alan Jackson was trying to get her to do that, because she said her tour ended at 3:45. But that doesn't mean you left the building at that time either. I mean, you had an officer that was killed. Uh, I've been involved in cases where there's been an officer shot or wounded or something has happened or attacked. And the detectives and the cops, they don't go home. They'll stay on their own time and work on these cases because it's that important. So, and I've seen them do that for ordinary citizen cases too, young kids or elderly, I mean, or really heinous crimes. And I've seen cops work for free just to make sure that they get what they have to do. So I thought that was a missed opportunity by the defense to try to narrow her down into that. But that's where maybe if they had an expert that they had, spoken to about certain things, that would have, stayed in his mind. I mean, listen, Alan Jackson, we know, is a very smart guy. He's great at doing this courtroom stuff, but he's not a cop. And there are certain things that happen, and that cops know, or cops would think automatically and say, no, this is what you need to ask.
Yeah,
It was just a bad look. How about that?
it was bizarre. And I think Alan Jackson, and of course, we're talking about in part the testimony of Officer Dever, where she explains the things that she had said before were planted in her mind by the defense, that she had been kind of programmed by her conversations with the defense to say these things, and they related to her time at the Canton Cop House that night, when others were in the Sally port, how long they were there, what they might have been doing. That was all planted, as she said, by the defense center. I don't think Alan Jackson saw that one coming.
I don't think he saw a lot of this coming. I mean, she was very combative. She was, snarky. She did everything that we were told in training not to do when you're on the stand. I mean,
Yeah.
really, it was like, making facial expressions, sighing. She even gave the judge a little attitude, like, huh, I mean, I was like, whoa, that's a dangerous game to play, because if you have to work within this environment for a long period of time, boy, your name is, they know who you are at this point. But, you know, I'd say good luck, testifying in future cases or
Well, good
making
luck
arrests.
keeping your job. Uh, I had a thought, and tell me what you think of this. That I was trying to think, okay, what was the genesis of this plan to go in, knowing that you obviously know your testimony helps the defense. They're not calling you by mistake. You're there because what you testified to before helps the defense, not something the Commonwealth wants. Do you think there was some master plan at the commissioner level or higher to get her to come up with an excuse that would explain away, at least in her mind, these things that help the defense?
Well, like I said, I guess that's the perception, and that these things occurred, and you have to see how that sits with the jury too. But at this point, you got to say, when she said something like my entire job rests on what I say
Yes.
here today.
Yes.
But not for nothing, officer. Every time you go to court, your job relies on it. Every time you go to traffic court or a criminal court or any court, and you're sworn in, you have to tell the truth every time. And if you have to take your lumps by telling the truth, you take your lumps, because the opposite of what can happen is not good. And that is something that you just need to, you have to deal with as a police officer. You go in there, if you're going to have to say something that is going to help the defense or help the defendant, okay, you get them tomorrow. I mean, that's just what the kind of attitude that you have to have. I don't think she did a service for herself. I don't think she did anything good for the prosecution. I know, this whole argument online is just, the free carry people, the Barry carry and read under the prison people. I mean, it's just, back and forth, left and right. But at the end of the day, it's what the jury thinks. How does this sit with a jury? And I think a lot of times people have objectively forgotten that message.
No doubt about it. And I try to, put myself in their seat as often as possible because they're the only audience that matters. And they're seeing this in theory, right? We don't know if there are any stealth jurors that know way more about this case than they've suggested. But this is coming to them as new information. They're weighing it with everything else they've learned. It may not have the impact on them that it has on us based on what we know and what we have heard. But we just don't know. And I think if you don't realize that this could be working, if you're the defense and you say, this is horrible, the jury's never going to fall for this, this witness is ridiculous, you don't know that there's not one or two people on that jury that's saying, very interesting.
And that's all you need. And that's
Yes.
all you need. And that's another thing that people forget, right? So the defense doesn't have to prove anything. They just have to plant that seed of doubt. But here's another problem with Officer Deva's testimony, is that she said things that the judge said you didn't want saying. She kept on bringing
FBI,
up the first trial.
FBI,
Yeah, and then
FBI.
of course the FBI, right? And now if somebody, we don't know for sure, like if anybody, this is a real small place apparently, where everybody knows each other. Everybody, how do you not know what's going on with this case? How do you find 12 people who've never
Exactly.
heard about this case? I think up there is difficult. But still, let's just say there's one person and they're hearing FBI. What's going on? Well, they're hearing about the first trial. I didn't know that. What? This is not the first trial. What happened in the first trial? Why are we back? Right? Those are all the things that, if there's one person in there like that, boy, what a monkey wrench they could throw in there for the prosecution.
Yeah, and that whole trial reference is scattered through many different witness testimonies, and I think Hank Brennan once said first trial when he was I think he might have been with Barrows, I think.
It's difficult, right? I mean, if you've been part of this case, like the defense team or the prosecution, if you've been part of the case, it's very difficult, and you're not doing it on purpose. And actually, it doesn't help the prosecution by bringing up, well, in the first case, the one we lost,
Well, yeah,
well, I mean, that's not helping them. So I don't think that's anything that is done on purpose. It's just, things happen.
and they're trying to sanitize it by saying the proceeding or in another proceeding or an earlier proceeding.
Yeah,
I
you
think
can't unhear those things.
I think we've blown way through that. And the FBI thing was definitely pounded on by Never Say Never, but there's also been other hints that they were involved. Sometimes they were just a federal agency. What do you think about last trial? And we can't wait to see what happens in this one because it's a little different with the ARCA experts. They were totally independent in trial number one, right? They were brought in by the feds, and it was, I call it manna from heaven for the defense. These independent, truly independent experts come to a conclusion that supports your case. No collision, no collision. I mean, and that is the defense case, no collision. All this other stuff, and I want to get to this too, because the conspiracy and framing is, I think, a lower key in this orchestration of the defense than it was the first time. But so they come in, and they've got this concept, and it's just so different than it was the first time. The players are different. Some of the defense witnesses were called by the prosecution the first time. So many of the prosecution witnesses from the first time have not been called, won't be called, Proctor factor, primary. Do you think the jury, when they see things like this, kind of a long drawn out question, when you see things like this guy Proctor heard all about this dude, where is he? I think it's got to be very unsatisfying for a jury to just, is the guy dead? I mean, why is he not here? What could you contrast between trial one and trial two that might have a bigger impact on the jury, like the missing Proctor?
Yeah, well, that's from the police perspective, right? So why isn't the case investigator here, or according to Sergeant Buchanan, right? He wasn't the case investigator; he's the case manager or whatever he was.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean,
Not the lead
yeah.
investigator.
Oh my
Yeah,
God. Yeah, no. So I think people would say, well, yeah, what happened to the investigator? Why isn't he here? And then they hear other tidbits, like the FBI now and all these other things, and and you just kind of say to yourself, how is this going to, play out? I mean, they heard the text messages being read again, right? So they get that in there. But the prosecution did a great job, like you were saying before, about keeping the third party theory out by not bringing in the same cast of characters that they brought in the first time. And but Officer Devers now opens the door for this third party. That's where, people say, oh, it wasn't effective bringing her in. And I say, well, hold on a second. The defense has not been able to bring really in their third party theory, but now that door has been opened to them by this officer's testimony, because she's talking about two people that she thought she saw that no longer see them because she created this false memory. And now all of a sudden people are like, what? Who are these people? What's going on? We don't have the cop here anymore. We have, all the different things that go on. Listen, I saw some of the was it Dr. Welch's
Mhm.
thing. But here's what I have to say about that. You know, could he have been, very effective with his, for the jury with, with the blue man suit and everything like that? Yeah, maybe.
You're right.
But
You're
here's
right.
my problem with that. If and this is where I wonder how this gets in. He uses most of Officer Tully's work, to Trooper Tully's work, which if you saw Trooper Tully, excuse me, Trooper Paul,
Paul,
Joseph
Trooper
Paul, right?
Paul. Yeah.
Sorry, Joseph Paul. Oh my God, if you bring his testimony in again, holy cow! I mean, because that was like, yeah, it just happened, right? I think I was like, it just happened. So
Yeah.
I was going, oh wow, this guy's pretty good. And then when I heard that he was using mostly, Trooper Paul's stuff, I'm like, oh God, like really, really, that's because Trooper Paul, he's on my list of people that need to be retrained.
I don't know.
There's a couple.
I'm not even sure he was trained in the first place. You get a real sense of this kind of Mayberry, RFD, Barney Fife kind of, you know, department, and so I think people are torn between, are they just incompetent and not bright, or are they intentionally doing things to harm other people? To be honest, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either, but you know what? But police training and police experience, two different things, right? The training gives you the framework that you need to do, so you can get the classroom work, the textbooks, whatever, classroom instruction, roll call instruction, whatever it may be. There's always opportunities to train the cops. And listen, when even the New York City Police Department has, because it's so big, you can't train every police officer that's in uniform, excuse me, how to do crime scenes. But you have an opportunity every roll call to say, okay, guys, if there's a shooting or something happens, this is what needs to be done. You could do that in every 5 minutes every day before they go out on the street. So don't say that there is an opportunity and you have it costs so much money to do this stuff. No, we did it that way. It's very simple because the uniform cops who get the least amount of training, by the way, are the most important aspects of crime scenes and criminal investigations. And generally, what that uniform officer does makes or breaks the investigation. And we can now look at a case like this one and say, this is exactly what we're talking about. That the first police officer on the scene didn't control the scene, didn't keep the witnesses separate. None of that stuff happened. Didn't have any crime scene tape. Nothing. And that cardinal rules that I had mentioned earlier when we first talked about, the number one cardinal rule is treat every death as if it's suspicious until proven otherwise. Period. End of point.
And with Proctor again, this coming through other witnesses, 16 hours in, he's already wrapped up the case. It's already a done deal. Let me get back to the question that I actually forgot what I was saying as I was going through it. I do that a lot, Joe. It was
Yeah, me too.
about it was the independence of the ARCA witnesses in trial number one.
Right.
Very easy. Now, we learned after the fact that Bowtie Ronnie, that's the juror that called Ron something, always wore a bow tie. He said that they thought, well, those were just insurance investigators that were hired by Karen Reed's insurance company. Not a crazy idea, but obviously way wrong. Why don't you just tell the jury that there was a federal investigation? These reports were generated as a result.
I guess because it would open up the door to why is there a federal investigation into this?
Well,
Right. So
the court can
what's the
say to the
federal nexus?
jury,
People would ask.
I mean, obviously, if I'm on the jury, I'd say, tell me this, come on, don't hide that from me. But the fact is, those things happen all the time. Carved out pieces of evidence are kept from the jury. So you just instruct them, this was, ladies and gentlemen, this was part of a federal investigation. It's not your concern what that was about. And then you move on.
Right, but this, like, if I'm in that jury, I'd be like,
Of
what
course
do you mean
you
I shouldn't be
would.
concerned about the
Of
federal
course.
investigation? So
Of
that, yeah,
course.
a
Of
lot of,
course.
but you know what though? So many people don't realize like how the feds actually get involved in cases. I mean, most of the time they have to be invited into a case because if there's no federal nexus, then there is no federal intervention. So yeah, that I think that's the reason why. I mean, you open up that door about why the feds are there, and then I think you open Pandora's box, which we know that the judge has been trying to keep everything under a lid in regards to some of this stuff because whatever her schedule allows, that kind of thing. I mean, that it's by 4 o'clock. This case is over. There's no
Yeah.
overtime here.
That is true. If they go 410, it's a travesty. So we look now at trial two, and what has happened with the ARCA witnesses between trial one and trial two? They are no longer totally independent. And I've argued from the beginning that they should have taken what they had, run with that, stay totally independent, because you saw what happened in pretrial motions. I mean, there was the pearl clutching when Judge Bev was, I'm gravely concerned, because she felt there might have been some contact between the defense team and the ARCA witnesses when they were claiming the ARCA witnesses were truly independent. Well, now there's not even that discussion. They're not independent. The question may be when they became retained by the defense. But the point is now when they're on the stand, they ain't independent. What's your take on how that might affect the jury's perception of these experts? Because now they're kind of like hired guns, even though that's not the total story.
Yep, and that's the exact what he call. And Hank Brennan is going to actually frame it that way because that guy should write a book on how to. And if he doesn't have one already, but he should write a book on how to cross-examine somebody because he's been really spot on with his his thing. I just like I said, I think that there could be potential issues for that. But yeah, the prosecution is going to really tear into that, and he's going to label them as you're working for the defense, and that's it. And that's the way they're going to go for it. And it wouldn't be untruthful because hey, listen, it is what it is at this point. And
Yeah.
at this point, I think we might just see ARCA left. I mean, that might be the only thing that we see in the next couple of days.
Yeah,
I can't imagine bringing anybody else in at this point. I
yeah,
know
we were
people are calling for Proctor. They're not calling Proctor.
No, I think it became clear when they used, well, actually, Brendan read most of the more salacious texts, but they brought what they wanted in through other witnesses. I get that. I still, everybody has their own strategy. I get it. They didn't want, I saw no downside to bringing this scoundrel in there after all the foundation had been laid about who he was, what he did. jury's going to be so mad that I know any conversations with these jurors after the fact, no matter what the verdict, they're going to say, why didn't we get to see Proctor? What happened? And I just don't see the downside. I mean, some people say, well, then Hank Brennan could cross-examine him and, basically throw him under the bus, right? That's okay. I'm all right with that, because what he did impacted the case, which impacted the ability for the Commonwealth to prove or not the guilt of the defendant. So I just say bring that on. So anyway, the other strategic decision is this ARCA decision, not to just say, look, we had the best evidence we could ever have from an expert. No collision, no collision. Why do you want to F that up and get connected to them?
I don't know. I mean, this is like everything else. This is another major question that I have. I have so many questions in this case. Out of all the cases that I've ever either been involved with or followed, this is the only case where I actually sit back and go, you know what? I can honestly tell you, I don't know what happened. People talk conspiracy theory, and I'm like, okay, if this is a conspiracy, this is the worst one I've ever seen, because they certainly didn't dot their I's and cross their T's in order to keep this thing, going. I live by the Ben Franklin quote that three people keep a secret as long as two of them are dead. I mean, how do you
That's
keep
good.
that
I
kind
haven't
of a
heard that one.
secret? How do you keep that kind of a secret this long? I mean, it's impossible with this many people involved in a conspiracy. I mean, come on.
Yes. So let's talk about that.
It's bad police work, I can tell you that.
Yeah, and that's pretty straightforward, and I think people understand it. But let's talk about frame versus conspiracy, and I think there's a difference. There's
Mhm.
the argument in the first trial was very much, aggressive. They framed her, and they did this, and then the jury gets that, and they're chewing on it in the back room, and they all of a sudden are putting a burden on the defense to prove there was a conspiracy, a frame. Well, obviously that ain't the way it's supposed to work. So I feel, and get your take on this, that they've backed off on that. Yeah, they've
Mhm.
suggested some shaky things going on between some of the players, but it's far less a concerted effort to frame somebody. It's just, jurors, these are questions you should be asking when you try to figure out if the Commonwealth met their burden.
Well, if you remember, I think the opening statement of the first trial, I think Alan Jackson said they framed her basically in sum and substance. That was like his very first sentence, within that. I don't know the exact quote, but that was the first sentence. And then went on to prove how incompetent the police were. And I thought that was a bad move, because if you're going to say this person's framed or it's a conspiracy, then you need to prove that. If he would have started off and said, "This is going to be one of the worst police investigations you have ever seen from beginning to end, and I'm going to lay it out why this case should have never been brought to trial." That, to me, like I said, I'm not a lawyer, but that would have been my opening statement, because all the evidence was there for a failed police investigation. Like I said, starting from the time the 911 dispatcher called this case in, there's lack of supervision. There is just a lack of crime scene control. And then the investigators that come afterwards, I can't tell you which one I thought was worse. Was the Buchanan, or was it the Lieutenant Gallagher? I think it was Gallagher, right? Who makes
Yep.
the terrible decision of not saying the only person that can access the evidence room to get the correct containers to secure evidence is, to me, mind-boggling. That I just like, well, I didn't send him, I sent somebody else. Well, then why didn't he get him? Oh, he doesn't have access to what? I mean, first of all, if you're the supervisor for the detectives or whatever investigative unit, whatever they call themselves, you should have a kit in your vehicle. Simple as that. And the sergeant should have a kit in his vehicle, right? Not every one of your investigators need this kit, but that kit should have things such as, be able to lift fingerprints, secure evidence, with swabs, whatever you think you need. I shouldn't be knocking on doors and getting solo cups and stop and shop bags. I mean, we're talking about what I believe is a pretty wealthy neighborhood kind of thing, that they have the money and the resources to do this stuff. Why don't they have this stuff available to them?
Yeah. And one of the first things I thought was exactly that when I heard this, and they had their, some of their evidence bags handy, Uh, they should have a little, not a full-blown CSI kit, but just a little thing. Well, guess what they
Tackle
have
box.
now? Yeah, exactly. Guess what they have now, Joe, as a result of the audit? I think it's every squad is equipped now with this little mini CSI. So to that end, I'll give them credit that they're making up for
Okay,
a major
but what was
mistake.
the training on it? Did they everybody
Yeah.
trained it? So you put this in somebody's car, like, look, for instance, like in New York City, all the precincts that had, had water with them, you had to have a flotation device and this and that. But they never asked the cops that were taking that sector with the water, do you know how to swim? Right? They never asked that at roll call. They're like, you're just getting the sector, sector atom right on the ocean. But can you swim? No. All right, so why bother? Right. So once again, you could put a kit in everybody's car. That doesn't mean that they're going to be able to do it.
Yeah. Yep. You're right. Baby steps, Joe. We start with the tools. Hopefully, we'll train the people how to use them.
You know what
Some,
though, Mike? In policing, baby steps and face washes are basically the same thing. Because when something goes bad, the police department says, "Oh, we need to go training and we need to have equipment." Okay, and look, everybody, look what we did. Okay, now move on.
Mhm.
Because why? It just gets everybody satisfied that okay, they did something. Well, to me, that's not good enough because the problems for both Canton and even the Massachusetts State Police in regards to their training and effectiveness about what supervisors do is lacking.
Yeah, and I think this reactive approach rather than proactive, it's going to get people killed, it's going to get people injured, and it's going to prevent truth and justice from being carried out because they haven't been able to do their jobs right in the first place. They're just learning from their mistakes along the way.
And you're going to lose cases.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the Brian Walsh case that's up there now. It's already a mess.
Yep. Yeah. I was going to ask you about, and this is not really germane to some of the stuff we've been talking about, but I just want to get your take on it anyway. There's this question about the tools that were used or not used, and maybe now they've fixed that. Who knows? But what about the personnel? I get a feeling, and I kind of mentioned Mayberry RFD earlier. No offense to that wonderful show, but what do you think about their process to get the guys, the women, the talent in the force? Would you put some attention to that process?
Well, listen, I mean, they get paid pretty well, so I'm sure that they have pick of the cream of the crop, so to speak. Policing is a weird kind of thing, right? It's first of all, it's a job that chooses you, not the other way around. You could say, yeah, I want to be a police officer. That doesn't mean you're going to be one. So you have to go through a process. You're gonna have to go through the background checks and the drug testing and the psychological exams and the medical exams and all the other things. And there's a lot of people that fall out during all these things because they don't have either the background or the medical or the drugs or whatever. So there's always something that could befall a candidate. So at the end of the day, you get somebody who doesn't have any of those issues or who was never caught doing a crime or using drugs or whatever that, it just it's an imperfect system. Civil service is an imperfect system, but you also prevent certain things in major departments, nepotism and cronyism and all the other things that go with. However, in smaller departments, things like that can creep in. Nepotism and cronyism, and hey, I'll make a phone call for this person or that person. So this still happens in policing, even in even in big police departments, where if you know somebody, you get this, you get that spot, you get the thing. I mean, it's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah.
But listen, recruitment, training, selection, discipline are all hallmarks of good police hiring. And it's just something that if you find somebody and you recruit the right person, you select them, you have to train them properly, and then of course you have to supervise them. And I think their supervision issues are really glaring. And I'm not talking about just in regards to the crime scene stuff, but we also saw about when you, as a supervisor, come across misconduct, what do you do about it? Because we saw this in the first trial come back and bite them about misconduct, verbal, text messages, whatever it may be, lack of, following policies and procedures and those kind of things. We saw that in the first trial. And, it is what it is at this point. But let's put it this way: there's enough problems that they can address them all at the same time because you're talking about two different things, actually three different things. You train your patrol people, you train your investigators, and then you also put your supervisors through some supervision classes. So you could walk, talk, and chew gum all at the same time and get this up and running within a few months. It's not that difficult as far as I'm concerned.
And if you do well enough, like Never Say Never, you get to sit in front of the commissioner one on one, and that's something you would want, I would think, because you would think it'd come as a result of a promotion, but in this case, as a result of the need to testify in a certain way. But I digress. So, in this particular police force, and I kind of described this area, and I've been up there enough times to get a feel for it. I've done the research on these cases: Stoughton, Dedham, Canton. They call it kind of the axis of evil. These three medium-sized towns. I think 25,000 residents roughly in each of them. There seems to be a little mixing there of the police forces and the investigations. We've seen in the Sandra Birchmore case, a Stoughton crime, that there's been some overlap with officers from Canton. Tully, I think, was involved. And there was another officer, I can't remember his name offhand. Lanigan, not Lanigan. What's his name? I can't remember his name. Anyway, is that in your experience normal to have that kind of cross-pollination of these departments?
Well, I'm unfamiliar with that just because I worked in such a big place. I mean,
Right.
when I hear something like, oh, 25,000 people, I'm like, that's like 1 square block in Brooklyn. I mean, that's, that's just something that, we didn't have to deal with that. But we did have other police agencies.
Fanning.
We had
Sorry, Fanning. Go ahead.
we had other police agencies, of course. You had the MTA police, you had the Long Island Railroad police, and Port Authority police. So and of course state police. I mean, you're working and doing all these things, and I put out a short the other day too because it was in regards to this case and with the FBI. I mean, and how the FBI actually gets involved in cases because it's important because television does not it distorts the whole thing about when the FBI comes and elbows their way into that's not what it happens unless there's a federal nexus, right? There's terrorism, Hobbs Act, kidnapping. Those are the kind of things where they can step in and take over. But even then, they sit and wait to see how the investigation unfolds, even with a terrorism incident. They're not coming out right away and saying we're in charge until it's actually proven that, yeah, you know what, guys. And it's a very good relationship that you have between law enforcement and the FBI. And,
So they don't come in and just take over and grab the case and say, "Listen,
yeah,
Beatty,
only
there's
in Die Hard movies, yeah.
there's deference to the local authorities, generally."
Well, first of all, they're the boots on the ground. They know all the people that are involved in these things, and there's a lot more local cops than there are going to be FBI agents. Let's put it that way. And listen, that's the reason why we have task force. In regards to terrorism task force, bank robbery task force, kidnapping task force. The FBI doesn't have that authority to work in basically local law enforcement cases unless they are partnered with local law enforcement. That's why they have to be invited into the case. Like I said, unless there's a federal nexus, of course, then it's a whole different story. But even then, they still need the local cops to help them because do canvases and this and that,
Yeah.
which Mike we haven't even gotten into. If and,
Oh.
and since I brought it up myself, just because of the time, if I was a sergeant that responded to a scene where there was a body laying on somebody's door, you could bet your sweet Pippi that not only that house would have been canvassed, every house, I don't care what time it was, you're knocking on everybody's doors.
Of
We
course.
used to do this even in apartment buildings where you had somebody was stabbed or shot in the hallway, 3 o'clock in the morning. You're knocking on people's doors. Sorry to interrupt you, but
Yeah. What'd you
this is
hear? What'd you see? Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And
There.
one thing I did learn though, Mike, sorry to interrupt. One thing
That's
I
okay. I
did
was
learn,
interrupting you before you were interrupted me. So go ahead.
one thing I did learn about the kind of questions that you need to ask is, and so, so I worked in some pretty busy places and uh, you never ask the question, did you see anything unusual last night? Because if you live in a place, and I remember I asked this question and the woman's like, no. I'm like, 5 people got shot in front of she goes, that's not unusual. It happens
No.
every day. Like almost, I mean, it was, of course I'm being a little flippant here, but so yeah, you learn but you learn from your mistakes and you do that stuff and you keep on learning. And yeah, why wasn't the canvas? Listen, you canvas the people, witnesses, surveillance cameras, all of these things should have been done. I'm sorry.
Of course. I mean, I met with the neighbor 2 doors down. He's at 30 Fairview, right? When I was up there knocking on doors, I was doing my own canvas. And he answered, and we chatted for a while. I said, as of today, and this was probably a month ago now, has anybody from law enforcement, any investigative person, come to you to ask what you may have seen or heard that night? Not a soul has knocked on this guy's door. 2 doors down from where this happened.
Yeah,
Not a
and
broad canvas.
unacceptable.
It's
Unacceptable.
it's unbelievable. It really is. And since that time, nobody's stopped by either. So it's not like somebody raising the issue has poked the bear and said, "Oh, maybe we should even now go out and see what we might have found."
Right. But here's an example about how if you want to prevent a conspiracy theory flying off the handle, this is one of the ways. Just do what you're supposed to do as the police, right? If they would have canvassed everywhere. Now, we can argue all day long if they should have searched the house or not, right? Because honestly, I look back at this and ask, where's the probable cause to get into the house? Yes, I can ask for consent. But Mike, as you know, as just as bad as anybody else, getting consent from people and then the police doing something, if they find something now, oh, they coerced me. They did.
Mhm.
There are big issues with consent from law
Sure.
enforcement perspective. Trust me. So my question is, what would have been the probable cause to get into that house? Were there footprints that left? I mean, it was snowing. Were there footprints that left the house to the body? We don't know, right? There's never been documented. It's never been really spoken about. But if I were to be standing there and say, look, this looks like they were dragging somebody, it looks like there's multiple things right where this body's found. And if, oh, it was snowing heavy. Yes, I understand that. But as we all know, even as kids playing in snow, you can walk in snow while it's still coming down. Hours later, there will be lower still than the rest of
True.
it.
That's true.
So there could be telltale signs where you can go and say, okay, at least you knock on the door and then ask the people what's going on. Did they hear anything? Did they see anything? It's on their front lawn. How do you not do this? And now, yes, we do know that they speak to them, but my question comes down to is, why does it take so long to even get any of this done, and why not all the other houses that have right in the view of it, video surveillance cameras from the entire blocks all around it? I mean, this is a nice looking neighborhood. You're telling me that nobody has the Ring cameras?
Yeah, I know that the gentleman I spoke to did not, but I know right across the street, we know that person did. And looking at that house from the front, and I've done videos of this so people can get that perspective. It is kind of a 45-degree angle, and maybe there wouldn't be anything, but maybe you look, maybe you look at the video. You don't just assume that it's not going to have anything there. Let me ask you this: push comes to shove, and you're in the exact same scenario. You don't think you have probable cause. Do you not then just figure, hey, if a consent search is the best I can do, I'm going to do it?
Yeah. And you're going to have somebody sign that paper, though. So we used to have a consent form, and that consent form would say that I'm giving, officer this or officer that or sergeant this, or, permission to do it, and have them sign it, almost like the Miranda waiver. So
Sure.
that at the end of the day, when they say, "Oh no, I was coerced," and like, look, we gave you a form, we let you read it, you signed it, and you still, so at least you had something to back it up.
Of course,
But
yeah. I was sleepy. I was very sleepy, Joe, and I didn't
But
know what I
but
was
here's the
doing
thing,
or what
right?
I
If
was
they say,
signing.
"No, I'm not giving you consent," this and
Hmm.
that, well, now does that raise my level of proof, right?
Hmm.
Now I need to maybe, speak to the district attorney, call
Yep.
him up, wake him out of bed, say, "Hey,
Get a
and,
judge.
and listen, I know this is a very small area compared to this, but we used to have what we call a riding DA, and that riding DA was on duty 24 hours a day. And if something happens at 2 o'clock in the morning, you call it. We had a beeper. I'm dating myself, so you call the beeper line,
Hmm.
and and they would get back to you because they would be up all night waiting to see what would happen, right? So it depends on where you were working. If the DA knew he or she was going to sleep that night, so and you would call them up and say, "Hey, listen, this is what I have." But here was the other cardinal rule with that: if the district attorney tells you something to do or not do, you have to follow what they said, because if you don't, you're in big trouble.
Yep. Yep.
So if they say to you, "Okay, they don't have consent, we don't have this, you know what, we don't have anything right now, but you know what? See if we can find this, or see if we can get this." Or maybe here's another suggestion. Why don't we wait till keep the scene, let's secure it, let's wait till the daylight comes, and maybe we can see something else. Maybe we'll see some other evidence that we can say, "Hey, look, there's a nexus to this house." Right? But none of that gets done.
Yeah. Yeah. And on a practical level, let me ask you this. We know there were no sirens, but it was, like a disco out there on the street. There were lights flashing and a lot of movement. Does it surprise you that the owner, Brian Nicole Albert, slept through all of that? Do you believe that?
Yes, I do.
You do?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm not a sleeper. I go to bed late, I wake up early. But if I would have, you wake up to go, well, listen, get to a certain age, you go to the bathroom. And if you go to the bathroom and I don't care what kind of blackout shades you have, if those lights are going on, the sounds, the fire truck or whatever, the ambulance, those booming uh, walkie talkies. I tell you, I can't imagine that. Unless, like I said, listen, we all don't, and here's the flip side of that. We do know that they were all out drinking they were out drinking, and and maybe could be just passed out, and
True.
that could be a logical response to it. But you know what? Me knocking on the door would have awakened them for
You
sure.
you might
Because
sober up if the cops, fellow cops, even are knocking on the
yeah, well, we
door.
call it the cop knock, right? I mean, there's a difference.
Oh, is it? How does that go? How does that sound?
Oh, the cop. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's like you hit with this boom, boom.
Boom,
It's not
boom.
just you're not doing the or hitting a little ting, 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 ting. You're not doing that.
Okay.
It's like the warrant knock. And
So
then
is
you
it?
keep
It's
on
like.
ringing the
Is it
doorbell.
like that? Or like that?
Somebody. Oh, it's loud. Yeah, it's
Okay.
loud. I mean, but how about ringing the doorbell? This and that. I mean, it's just Hey, listen, we found a unconscious person on your front lawn.
Yeah. Anything? You know the person at your house. Uh, you
Yeah,
know, I don't know. It's just so many of those things in this case drive me crazy, and they shouldn't because it's not on me, Joe. But they drive me crazy because
well,
we're human beings. We want to know what happened. And as I've said time and time again, and it hasn't changed from trial one to trial two, we get to the end of the prosecution case, and technically we have, even though we know they have a rebuttal case. And I'm saying, I don't know what the hell happened. That's
right.
that's reasonable doubt,
Well,
and
that's
you're
what I
done.
said. Yeah, I don't know what happened. I can't tell you. But here's the other thing on this. From the police perspective, I always look at cases, in the eye of what I could have done, what I would have done. Yes. Listen, there are far more investigators out there and supervisors that have a ton more experience than I do. Let's just throw that out there. So if I'm saying that this could have been done, I can only imagine how they would be weighing it.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. And supervision is always key, and that checks and balance apparently didn't work either, and that's something. And I try to be objective, Mike. When the police do a good job, I say they do a good job, and when the police don't do a good job, I say they don't do a good job. So I always piss off one group no matter what
Yeah,
I say.
of course, and that's all right. And we're in the same position here at Justice
Yeah.
Serve TV. Linda and I, we call it like we see it. Sometimes it's for one side, sometimes it's for the other. I guess this case just seems to be so overwhelmingly against the Commonwealth, based on just our observations and experiences. We got no agenda here. So the one,
No,
the one
I don't
thing
have
we're not
any dog in the fight.
exactly, Chloe or otherwise.
Oh
So
boy, yeah, that was and there was a pun that was unintended.
and we haven't heard a lot about Chloe, so I'm not sure if that's just being tossed aside as well. So one thing we are not going to figure out today, Joe, is what these jurors are thinking. But it may be sooner rather than later that we do. That they get this case and they get to sink their teeth into it, if I can put it that way. Hey,
Yeah, no.
and any final thoughts on what's to come and where this is going?
I'm going to stick with what I've already said, that this either ended another hung jury or a
Yeah.
not guilty. Listen, I think there's been reasonable doubt pushed forward enough by the defense, and like I said, we haven't even heard from the ARCA people yet. And the Dr. Russell, I thought, was very good
Yep.
in regards to explaining away why people react certain ways and through traumatic incidents. Oh, I
That
saw this
was
all the time.
genius. That was
Yeah,
genius because she's not a qualified mental health professional, but Brennan opened that door, and
and
when
experience matters.
he was asking her, well, did you know that she was supposed to have said, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. Do you remember that? She said, well, then she goes into this whole grief syndrome. That was
Yep,
a bonus that Brennan, that was a pile of dog poop for him that he did not see, and he stepped right in it. That opinion would never have been allowed. She's not
exactly.
qualified. Anyway,
Exactly. And he opened the door to that one. And like I said,
yeah.
he opens the door to now the police aren't believable and the police didn't do what they were supposed to do. They didn't document it. And I'm saying it wasn't Sergeant Barrow's job to document that taillight. He was just making an observation. And you know what? He also threw in something else that was interesting, because of all his bad memories, right? He said, that's not the driveway, right? That's not the
Yes, just
so
that's not the Reed's driveway, and he was
and all of
right.
a sudden, whew, it was like one of the cut to commercial at that point. But I thought that was I thought that was a great quote that he snuck in there, not because he was trying to sneak it in there, but he
No,
just he got that in there, and then the jury might have went, yeah, maybe this guy did have some memory issues because it's been going on for a while. But you know what? He knew that wasn't the drive from a
exactly.
photograph. He knew that wasn't the driveway. So
Yeah.
I think he kind of what he called. And listen, people argue with me all day on that. That's fine.
Yeah, no, there's so many elements going on in this case. That's why people are polarized by it, and that's why people are following it so closely. And I'm glad that we had a chance to chat and get your observations on this thing. We will definitely talk again as this thing unfolds. Your channel, give us the specific.
Yep, it's True Crime with the Sarge on YouTube.
Got it.
Yeah.
Well, appreciate it, buddy, and we will be in touch, I am sure, as this thing plods its way to conclusion. So, see you next time.
You got it, Mike. Take care.